Now, this is something I really want to talk about to be sure that everyone is cautious and stays level headed at all times. Now, for context, I live in the middle of nowhere in Canada. It was an old town that had quite a few abandoned buildings due to absence of residents. Me and many friends were tired of lack entertainment options for us. So we did what anybody would do. We explored these abandoned buildings. Prior to the experience I'm about to talk about, we never had anything too crazy happen to us. Especially, we'd see a small bit of blood, like liquid, and we'd see a pentagram on the ground from someone who went to a house previously. But nothing too bad. Until the last time I had gone exploring. Now, when I was younger, I used to go to a daycare that was part mental hospital. Weird combination, I know. It's closed down now due to lack of patience and lack of children at the daycare. I decided to go back there with my friends a few years ago. For context, I was 15 when this happened. Most of my friends were the same age. When we did get there, it was rather cliche. There was fog, it was dark, and there was a light drizzle of rain. We went to the main gate, which was padlocked shut. We decided to help each other hop over it and made a ton of noise. We were laughing and giggling the whole time, unsuspecting of what was to come. We looked around the small play park with flashlights we had on our person. Even with our somewhat powerful flashlights, seeing was rather limited. We decided to enter the daycare building. Glass and dirt crunched under our feet as we stepped into the daycare section of the complex. There were still old Legos, wood chips from previous furniture, old torn dolls, and toys thrown around. The further we walked around the daycare section, we naturally became more and more silent, until all we could hear was the crunch of the dirt under our feet. I found some crayons in a plastic container in the corner of the room. I walked over to pick them up, when all of a sudden we heard a loud crash coming from behind a metal door leading to the psych ward part of the building. My friends and I looked at each other. As a whole, we were a group of 5. Most of them were very bold and cocky. We looked at each other when my friend Brian suggested we go and look to see what made the sound. Personally, I was not too fond of the idea, but with my group of friends, there was no way anyone was going to decline such a thing. We all stacked up on the door and opened it. It was rusted to the floor, and we heaved it to get it open. As we walked in, the metallic smells and must become stronger, with a hint of something else which I couldn't put my finger on at the moment. We walked in, our flashlights pointed in every direction, with Brian leading the group. The hallways were tight, and to the left and right were the occasional metal doorway, some with doors open. I felt claustrophobic, and it felt a little hard to breathe. As we continued, Brian shone his flashlight into a room and recoiled. We all stopped walking as Brian slowly entered the room. "What is it?" I asked him. "I thought I saw someone here. It seems all fine." To be honest, I thought he was messing with us to increase our anxiety, but looking back, I think he was being completely honest. He backed out of the room and we continued walking deeper into the psych ward, when another friend swiftly told us to stop. We came to a halt and all listened. In the distance ahead of us, we heard the subtle pitter-patter of footsteps echoing through the hallway. We all looked at each other, fear in each of our eyes. Brian continued walking toward the sounds. We considered turning back for a second without Brian, wondering if some ghost or something was in the building. But we couldn't do that to him. The closer we got, the more I felt like I was being watched. When finally we entered a room on the right, which had the smell of rotting meat. In front of us was a dead deer. Its innards were spilled all over the floor, staining the concrete. A friend of mine had a very weak stomach and vomited all over the floor. That's when we heard a whispering from somewhere. Brian shone his flashlight to the corner of the room, where where a man with short hair was standing with his head down. He wore a bright green t-shirt stained with what I assume was blood, and torn baggy pants. He did not have any socks, and his feet seemed damaged. He was twitching and continued to mumble even after we saw him. We stared at him for a solid 30 seconds before he made the first movement. He looked up at us with a haunting grin that sent shivers down our spine. "You guys here to feast?" That kicked us over the edge, and we bolted out of the room and all the way back to the daycare center. The door was still open. We decided to try and slam it shut, but the rust and pure weight of the door almost kept it open. It took 3 of us pulling with all of our strength to close it. Just before we did, I could see the silhouette of the man watching us, his white teeth being the only other human feature I could see. As we sat behind the metal door, catching our breath for a second, all looking at each other for confirmation. After a little bit of labored breathing from each of us, we heard a light tapping on the door. That's when we decided that it was time to leave. We booked it out of the vicinity completely and ran home. A year after we visited the spot, police went back to do a routine search of the area and found the man. It was stated that this guy used to go to the psych ward before it closed down. He escaped the facility he was transferred to and lived off in the wildlife around the complex. When the cops brought him in, he had a series of diseases and sickness from eating raw meat. His mental condition was much worse. There were future rumors that he did kill someone in the forest while searching for food, but nothing has been confirmed. In the end, guys, be careful, especially in dangerous areas such as abandoned buildings. And creepy dude, let's not meet. Hope this story belongs here. I currently live in an RV in my mom's driveway. My town is just larger than a small one, and it's relatively safe. Lots of rich people, doctors, and other people live here, so it's kept a very nice, and crime is relatively low. I never expected something to happen to me, but tonight I met a man, and he was a reminder to me to always lock my door. Sometimes I forget to lock my door, even while sleeping, and it's never been a big deal to me because my town is generally safe, but I'll be locking my door from now on. It was 2 a.m. and I took my garbage outside to the bin. When I turned around, I noticed a figure in the dark walking towards me. I started to quickly walk away, but he spoke to me. He was a short man, probably in his 50s or 60s. I'm 23 and a female. He started talking to me about my living in the RV, and I took charge of the conversation to shut it down quickly. He told me what house he lives in and his name. He was being polite, but very creepy. I'm sure nearly every woman gets what I mean. The older man kind of creepy and too polite too because you're a pretty young woman. He told me I should come by his house sometime, and I'm like, yeah, sure. Maybe one day. Have a good night. And I walked back to my RV and locked the door. I figured he'd had left, but he didn't. I don't have a curtain on my window right now, and I could hear him pacing outside my window and mumbling to himself. I was just hiding, but I wanted to lock the door. I got up and looked outside, and he was staring right at me. He was waving his hand to me to get my attention, walking right up to my window and acting so erratic. It was so different from the guy I just met. I locked my door and he watched me, and after that he left my window. I felt like he was still there. 5 or so minutes pass, and then he's knocking at my RV door. I don't know if he tried to get in or not. It's just a flip handle, so I can't hear it or anything. I just waited there for an hour before I grabbed a knife and ran into my mom's house. I'm definitely getting a taser and a gun. I think he'd been standing across the street watching me. There's no reason for him to have been outside my RV at 2 a.m. I think he's been watching me for a while. People shouldn't really know that I live in the RV. Walking down the street, that's not something I take notice of. I only even started to pay attention to RVs and driveways since I started living in one. I still don't notice if people are actually living in them or not. Maybe I'm being naive, but it makes me wonder if he's been watching me, seeing that I live in the RV day after day. I don't go outside of my RV. I'm a homebody. So he'd have to have been staring into my RV to really even notice someone actually living in it. It terrifies me. I was so afraid of his intentions. He makes me realize that even though I'm in a safe town, I'm still a young, pretty woman. I'm a target on men's lists. It sucks that this is our world. Men out there who are like this towards women. So I was on my way home from Arby's, zoned out for a second and almost didn't notice his car. I tried letting him through, but he insisted I go on ahead. Didn't think much of it and just continued on walking. He drove on ahead and parked his car near some apartments. He had on a black polo shirt, so I assumed he was just dropping something off for a job or something. As I kept walking, he approached me and offered me $20. I asked why, but couldn't understand what he said in response. I refused since I know what's best for me. However, that didn't deter him. He grabbed my waist and I stepped to the side. He then started pulling me towards his car. I hit his hand so he wouldn't silence me and made sure to scream as loud as possible to try and attract any bystanders if I could. He managed to get me into his car, and just before he could close it, I stuck my foot through the door to keep it open. I then got out and made myself go limp, since adding dead weight without warning creates sudden resistance and it makes it harder for them to grasp you. Due to quick thinking, I was able to get away unharmed. I quickly booked it and got on the phone with my mom once I was at a safe distance. I made sure to stay on the phone until I got back. After that, I'd taken some time to calm down and waited for the cops to get there to get my statement. The officer ended up praising my quick thinking, telling me that I'd luckily done everything right in his situation. Please guys, take self-defense seriously. I only ever had a week-long course, and just that alone had managed to save my life. I didn't remember too much from my self-defense course and only used the basic techniques that I remembered, which was making noise, dropping my weight, and checking behind me. Any other actions I'd taken were a result of logic and quick thinking. Chances are, if I had gotten more self-defense training, it likely wouldn't have been as close of a call as it was. Also, never accept money from strangers. While there are good Samaritans, there is also people who don't have your best interests in mind. If you do think they have good intentions, make sure to double check by asking why they're offering you money. If you don't get good, legitimate reasons, then make sure you refuse. If you refuse and they still persist, then get away. So, to the kidnapper, let's not meet.